Alrighty, g'day everybody, it's the Doga! It's time for another favourite songs from each album video. Already done two of my favourite Australian bands, of course, the Angels and Cold Chisel, but now it's time for my favourite band of all time, and that is, of course, AC/DC. I've already done a list like this as a comment on a video made by Peter, aka the Lizard King channel. But, for those who don't watch his particular content, this video is for those that don't watch it. Basically, as I said, this is my favourite song from every AC/DC studio album from 1975 to 2020. Let's start all the way back at the beginning. I'm using the same CDs I previously shown off in my CD collection video. Let's start with High Voltage from 1975. Only 8 songs on this album. Not a bad debut. There are a few highlights, such as She's Got Balls and Stick Around and Show Business, as well as their cover of Baby Please Don't Go, but my favourite from this one, definitely got to be Soul Stripper. One of the best songs that Malcolm and Angus had written themselves all the way back in 1974. And unfortunately, it was no longer played after 1976, but still, good song. In the end, I don't think it would have fit in with the later set lists. Let's move on to TNT, also from the end of 1975. Just gave the original cassette of this a play this morning, and it sounded surprisingly good. Again, much different sound compared to High Voltage, and of course this has High Voltage the song as well. Again, there's some good songs. Of course, you've got some all-time classics like It's a Long Way to the Top, TNT, The Jack. But my favourite has to be Rocker. Especially in its original uncut format where it cuts out at the very end instead of the annoying fade out, as the original cassette does have the cut ending. And sounded pretty good too. It's a shame this wasn't performed very often with Brian Johnson beyond 1981, but still. Again, don't need to perform it. Now we move on to Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap from 1976. This is my favourite AC/DC album of them all, and always has been ever since I was young and listened to this on my dad's cassette copy of the album, which actually belonged to my mum because she put her name on it. But, you know, because my dad had gotten rid of his original... Actually, no, my dad's original copy was actually borrowed by a friend, but never gave it back. Again, this is another great album with a lot of great songs on it. The title track, of course, and Problem Child, and Ride On, and Squealer, and Big Balls. But of course, my favourite is the final track of this, which was the single from the time, Jailbreak. Definitely the greatest AC/DC song of all time, in my opinion. Now we move on to the following year, 1977. Let There Be Rock. Again, like the first High Voltage, this has only 8 songs, but at the same time, all 8 songs are incredibly brilliant, and it's often hard to tell which one is the absolute best out of all of them. Again, this has got some underrated gems, especially Overdose and Crab City in Blue, as well as some all-time classics like Dog Eat Dog and the title track. But number one for me from this album has got to be Whole Lotta Rosie. Always has been, that one. Came down between that and Let There Be Rock itself, but I ended up choosing Whole Lotta Rosie. Classic Bon Scott right there and then. Now we move on to Power Age from 1978. Again, the last of the albums recorded here in Australia at the now long since closed Albert Studios. 9 brilliant songs on this album, and it's often hard to choose which one would be the best. Rock and Roll Damnation, Riff Raff, and Gone Shootin' being up there in my favourites. But again, I'm going for Kicked in the Teeth this time, from 1978's Power Age. Definitely a good choice of song, that one. Should have been performed live more, but it doesn't matter. Alright, next studio album is, of course, Highway to Hell from 1979. In my opinion, Mutt Lange did what he could to shape the sound for American radio, and thus some of the the rawness of Power Age and Let There Be Rock had seemingly been smoothed off a little too much. I know a lot of people like this album, but lately I've noticed there's been quite a lot of appreciation for Power Age and Let There Be Rock over Highway to Hell. And the title track is my favourite from this one. There are some good highlights like Beating Around the Bush, Girls Got Rhythm, If You Want Blood, You've Got It. But Highway to Hell's the best song from that album. Right, and now onto the Brian Johnson albums. Let's grab this one here from 1980 is, of course, Back in Black. Again, it's often hard to choose which is the best song from this album. I'd have to say you can take your pick any time of the day, whether you like Back in Black, Hell's Bells, You Shook Me All Night Long, Have a Drink on Me, but my favourite from this is the last track again, Rock and Roll Ain't Noise Pollution. I would have probably picked Back in Black ahead of it at one point, but personally I think Rock and Roll Ain't Noise Pollution sounds a lot better to me. Doesn't get flogged as much as You Shook Me does, which really, I'm like, seriously, I hear that more than any other AC/DC song on the radio half the time. But, you know, that's the way it is. Now on to For Those About to Rock from 1981. Definitely a different sound again. We know that this album had some production issues. They attempted to record it in a particular studio in France and, whoops, that's about to fall over. But, of course, they ended up going to a warehouse where they had initially, and there goes my pillow over there, where they initially rehearsed and recorded them using a portable studio over there. Again, there's some good songs in here, like Inject the Venom, Snowballed, the title track, Put the Finger on You, but I definitely reckon Let's Get It Up is my favourite from this one. Another masterpiece from that era. Again, it should have stayed in the set list a bit longer, but never mind. Alright, now on to 1983's Flick of the Switch. I know this album has been criticised as being not as good as what had come before, but as of late there has been some appreciation for this, basically after reading up stuff on Steve Hoffman music forums as of late. And this is probably my favourite from the Brian era. Again, they've attempted to capture the same rawness that they did on Power Age and Let There Be Rock, but it's a shame they just didn't go back to Albert Studio 1. Instead, they went back to the Bahamas where they recorded Back in Black. In the end, I picked Guns for Hire as my top song from this album, just ahead of the title track and This House is on Fire being two of my other favourites from this one. And now we go to Fly on the Wall from 1985. Again, some more brilliant songs, even if this has often been considered their worst album. And for me, it's good, but it's just a classic case of take your pick whether you like this album or not. Again, the band attempted to go with that raw sound, but it just didn't sound right to my liking. Sounded a little off in places. Again, you've got some classics like the title track, Shaky Foundations, Danger, and of course, Sink the Pink. But my favourite, which is probably the most underrated song from this album, is Hell or High Water. Always liked that one since I was young, and I still enjoy it now. Alright, up to the next studio album from 1988, Blow Up Your Video. This was the last album produced entirely by Harry Vanner and George Young, and the only one recorded in France, I believe. I know a lot of people have been vocally criticising this one as of late, and yeah, well, say what you want. I don't mind this album, to be honest. Again, you've got some good songs on here. Heat Seeker, That's the Way I Want to Rock and Roll, Mean Streak, This Means War, Nick of Time. But I choose Rough Stuff as my favourite from this one. Don't know how well it would have went down live, but it's a shame that it never did get added to set lists at any point in the future, but I guess that's the way it is. I know a lot of people like this album, and I'm okay with it too. The Razor's Edge from 1990. This, of course, was produced by the late Bruce Fairbairn, and he was partially responsible for the commercial sound that this album has. It's definitely very commercial sounding compared to what had come before. Again, there's a lot of good tracks on this album. Thunderstruck, Money Talks, Fire Your Guns, the title track again, Rock Your Heart Out, that's another classic. But again, I picked one of the underrated ones, Shot of Love, from that album. I don't know, this one I reckon should have been played live. But I guess, you know, they didn't, which is a shame. Now we move on to another album that's often been considered to be not so good as of late. 1995's Ball Breaker. To be honest, I'm not entirely fond of this album myself. I very rarely play this album, to be honest. I didn't think I've played it since probably October of last year. But again, you've got some really good songs. Hard as a Rock, and of course Boogeyman, Hail Caesar, Call With Your Pants Down, and of course my favourite from this album is the title track, Ball Breaker. Just love watch Brian Johnson on that wrecking ball during the No Bull performance. It's a shame I was too young to go and see AC/DC. I was only about 3 or so, 2 or 3 at the time. Right, now on to Stiff Upper Lip from 2000. Again, this was produced by George Young on his own this time. I don't know, I've often been a little off on this album. It was about 6 years old when this came out, so often found this, you know, my dad played the living guts out of this. I don't know, it's definitely a lot bluesier than what had come before, and some of the songs like the title track, Safe New York City, Can't Stand Still, definitely up there. But another one that I think is extremely underrated from this album is All Screwed Up. Definitely should have been played live, but, you know, guess it wasn't meant to be. Sometimes you really wish they'd play a particular song and they just never play it, but having it on an album is good enough in the end. In 2008's Black Ice is up next. Another underrated album. Also their longest, with 15 songs, and the last album recorded with Malcolm Young on guitar before his eventual retirement and death in 2017. There's a lot more to choose from. I've often been fond of Rock and Roll Train, Big Jack, Skies on Fire, Stormy Mayday, and She Likes Rock and Roll, and of course the title track. I think I'll pick Big Jack as my favourite from this one. River Plate performance from 2009 is definitely a good performance of this, and also quite good when I saw them just up the road, the Queensland Sport and Athletics Centre in 2010. That was a really good night, that one. Right, let's move on to the last 2 studio albums now from 2014 is, of course, Rock or Bust. Again, I noticed some people have not been fond of this album, and yeah, well, it's also their shortest album as well, despite having 11 tracks. Excuse me, this was the first recorded with Malcolm and Angus's nephew Stevie Young in the band. Again, you've got some good songs. You've got the title track again. You've got Play Ball. Always thought Misadventure should have been on the set list. And Sweet Candy's also a good one too. But probably for me, Baptism by Fire is the best from this one. Got to see them perform it live in 2015. Again, up the road here at the Queensland Sport and Athletics Centre. Formerly known as ANZ Stadium, by the way. Oh no, they had to transfer that sponsorship down to another stadium in Sydney. Yeah. Queenslander! And of course, we've got the most recent album from 2020 is of course Power Up. Definitely a stronger album than the last two in my opinion. Although I do seem to rarely play it, I don't know, I just seem to favour the older albums more. But again, this is a good and very enjoyable album. Definitely showcasing a much stronger AC/DC than what had been beforehand. Again, you've got good songs on this one. Shot in the Dark, Kick You When You're Down, Rejection. I know a lot of people have been fond of Witch's Spell, but I find that one a little off-putting. Through the Mists of Time definitely is a very different song. But again, I'm going with another super boogie AC/DC classic song. I have to say Demon Fire is the best with this, from this album. Yeah, it's a shame we don't have any tours on at the moment because of stupid COVID. Otherwise, I would definitely go and see them again. But I guess it'll probably never happen now. But that is it. Those are all my favourites from every AC/DC studio album. Be sure to leave your favourites down below. Be sure to subscribe to the Be a Good Dog YouTube channel if you have not done so already. Once again, only a small portion of my audience, just like others say, not subscribed. But until next time, this is the Doga saying have a brilliant weekend, everybody. Stay safe in this crazy universe, the way it is with the COVID-19 driving everyone crazy all the time. And we shall see you again.